Make in India and HR, about new initiatives and its perspective. Then we look at how alignment of HR helps in achieving business goals. And third one is HR initiatives for success for the Make in India project. And fourth one is challenges for HR. Alright? Let's look at these three new initiatives which you look at, Make in India, Digital India and Skill India, are well connected with each other. The purpose of Make in India is to increase employment level in the country, increase our GDP and compete worldwide. These are the three most important purposes of Make in India. You have a Digital India, again very important. You cannot succeed in Make in India unless you are successful in Digital India. The major reasons of introducing Digital India is to remove corruption. You can't remove corruption unless otherwise there is a distance between the beneficiary and the service provider. The problem today in India is every beneficiary has to go in physically to the service provider. As long as that happens, you cannot remove corruption. So the big efforts on the part of our Prime Minister is to remove the beneficiary from the service provider. So there's hardly any contact point. If this is done, I think the pace of our economy would pick up. The major problem of multinational companies who come to India is the number of days it takes for a project to start. And when we compare this globally, we land up somewhere 150th place in the world. That's pitiful. And third one is Skill India. Again, you cannot succeed in Make in India unless you have a skilled manpower. We are the second largest in the world and are expected to be the first largest in the world by year 2030. We are already 1.26 billion people. And half of our population is below 25 years of age. Our average age as of now is approximately 27 years. When we compare with Japan, it's almost over 40 years. US, similar, Europe, China, all of them are, gray. And we are the only people who are actually with black hairs. When I say black hairs, not me and others around here, but average. On an average, we have more black hairs than putting the world at that comparison. Look at that. The government, through this Make in India project, and we start to raise this campaign, if becomes successful, would generate almost about 90 million jobs. That's 9 crores of jobs. And it will almost increase the output 6-fold, leading to almost $1 trillion, which is a wonderful achievement if this campaign becomes successful. This is a great combination as a country. We have a great democracy, we have a great demography, and a huge demand across the world. If you look at all countries in the world, the demand is almost zero in Western countries. The demand is almost zero in US. And wherever there is developed nations exist, the demand is at the zero level. So where the demand comes? Actually, if you look at demand, is important from 2 components. One, your population. Number 2, our standard of living. We haven't achieved those standards of living with Japanese or Americans or Europeans. Because if you look at every family there has everything possible what they want to achieve materialistically. But when I look at our own population, even in the cities, we are nowhere close to. So it is going to be a potentially huge demands in the future as far as India is concerned. Okay, the next one. When you look at how do we achieve the objectives of Make in India, the most important thing which I look at is a paradigm shift in managing people. We have to move away from the past, the way we used to manage our people in the organizations. The assumptions of the past won't apply to the new age workers. The way we used to think about workers in the past, like for example, we used to think that a worker needs jobs to run his family. Forget about it now. The youth does not depend on that. Youth is looking for a career. Youth is looking a job as a fun place. A youth is looking job as a challenges. A youth is looking for his own development. So what are the past assumptions we talk about are today irrelevant. Lastly, organizational effectiveness will depend upon the people's performance in the organizations. And getting people's performance is the job of the HR. Yeah, all that an HR guy has to do, he has to develop people, he has to acquire right kind of a people, he has to ensure that he motivates them to get to that high level of performance. Unless the people are committed to the job, you cannot achieve the objectives of an organization. And people do not commit to their jobs unless otherwise they see their future in the organization. In order to take full advantage or unleash the potential of the huge youth in our country, there are going to be major changes in the labor law, so that more investment can flow from. Why major investment is not flowing to India in compared to China? Two most important reasons. Number one, hurdles, that is labor law is a big hurdle. Number two, the slow pace of approvals in our country and the number of approvals which are the foreign countries to take is much, much higher than any other country in the globe. And the disciplined industry should be the watchword. Wherever in our life, if you look at, go around the streets, go in the bazaars, go in the shop floors, we have a disciplined mission. Discipline does not mean that you don't speak. Discipline means every aspect of our life. Industry should work towards reducing attrition rate, which is an undesirable cost. Look at when people leave organization, what all negative impact it has on organization. It's not just the cost of acquiring, training, but the loss of productivity. A new person who joins requires few months of time in order to adapt to the new conditions and start performing. Now, what is required is you need to have right kind of hiring, you need to have a planned hiring, and then emphasize on skill building, freedom and empowerment. You cannot control the youth anymore the way we used to control our old age people. For them, empowerment does not mean that you give them some kind of an authority. No, their empowerment is different. They want to do things the way they want to do it. They want to spend their time the way they want to spend. So, HR people have to look at how do they, in fact, incorporate those business of workers into their strategy. Skill building cannot happen unless otherwise the corporate and the individual together are willing to do so. Firms are advised to rethink and rework HR policies to incorporate aspirations of employees. When you compare the old employees with the new ones, there's a huge amount of gap in aspirations of the two. So you cannot apply the same logic which you used to apply on the old employees on these new employees. So there has to be a paradigm shift in thinking on policies and other aspects of HR practices. Therefore, it is essential to balance life and work in order to attract quality people. It is a major issue, especially in big towns. You hardly have your quality time with your family, friends, in social network. We are after all human beings. We are not social, animals. We need our own time, and we want to spend that time the way we want to spend. Okay. Therefore, the concept of flexi time, the concept of 5 days a week, even people talking about 4 days a week. Where do you get all that? The corporate has to think, how do they continue to maintain their competitiveness not only at national level, but globally, and at the same time, keep this flock together? How do we do that? All stakeholders, that's your workers, your employers, organization, and you including other interested groups, have to come together on a table, dialogue table, and identify what are the challenges which face people today in our country, people when I say the working population in our country, and solve those challenges. Some of the challenges which I can look at are workforce demographics and diversity. And what do you mean by diversity? Look at a typical multinational corporation. You have people from different nationalities, people from different religions, people of different age, people of different educational background, people with different experiences, people of different caste, race, creed, etc., etc. Now, all of them come with a different mindset. That's very important. All of them have a different background. All of them have a different aspiration levels. And all of them think differently. Now, this is the role of an HR, to identify what are the commonalities of this particular group and what are those differences. They must be kept apart. So make use of commonalities and identify and respect those differences. That's a big challenge for any HR. Next one is multi-generational workforce. Yeah, that's a big issue. Today if you look at, you have people like us from a different generation, youth like you from a different generation. Your aspirations, our aspirations do not match. The way we used to, the way we were brought up and the way you are being brought up is a vast difference. You are the guys who are basically seen opulence. Never seen the scarcity in your life ever since you are born. But all others who are people without hair or with grey hairs have actually seen the scarcity of everything. We haven't seen any opulence, whether it was our income, whether it was the goods, services, whatever it was. Now, if you haven't seen a scarcity, you will not, in fact, care for wherever there is a scarcity of obligation. Number one. Number two, today's youth is involved in a family in every possible decision making. What kind of house to buy, what car to buy, where to go for a restaurant, what vacations and where to go for restaurant. All these, the way you are brought up in the family, you would expect the similar kind of things on the job also. As a younger, you would like to expect from the corporation that you are involved in the decision making. Now the problem is, all decisions are made people with hair or with grey hair, without hairs. With grey hairs or without grey hairs. Now they have their own assumptions about the people, about the work, about the corporations. You have your own assumptions. The two don't match, and therefore there's conflict. So we as other people keep saying, today's youth don't like to work. Today's youth does not care about rules and regulations. Today's youth is not interested in, respecting people. No, that's not the issue. Issue is, we got to look at how today's youth is brought up. That has a huge influence on the way they think, on the way they want to get themselves involved. If this generational gap has to be met, HR manager has to have systems and practices in place wherein the youth is involved in decision making. Again, a knowledge worker. When I compare the old worker and today's worker, is a vast difference. An old worker would like to stick to a job or would have stuck to a job for the entire his life with one company. Ask your uncles and parents, where did they work? They say, I worked at Villa Cement for 40 years, and you could see the pride in his eyes. But you ask today's youth, say, for last 10 years where have you been working? He would count 10 companies. And you ask him why? Yeah, I didn't like it. Why did you like it? Probably he will not be able to give you a right answer, or you may not appreciate that answer. Now that's a major difference between the old and new. So a big challenge for the HR, how should it reduce this attrition? What it should do for those people keeping, because as I mentioned earlier, if you don't reduce attrition rate, it's going to be huge cost for any company. technological changes is causing major issues. Right? The way the work is done, the way the technology is changing, the entire spectrum of our life is going to be much different. So the way you used to communicate as HR people in the past, that's ways, our old ways, which will not do it. Probably you send a hard copy of later circular, the young guys may not read that, may throw it out, but you send an SMS or an WhatsApp, hey guys, it is sure that you will look at and you will revert to immediately. So find how do you communicate with the people, how do you train them. Don't try and follow the old methods of instructions in the classroom. People won't appreciate that. Today you need a combination of methods. The basic idea is to, can your training enthrall those guys? Can this involve those guys? Is it interesting to them? Is it meaningful to them? Unless that is done, I don't think you can train the youth today. Socio-economic change. Look at around how economics have changed for the last 20 years and how societies have changed. What are those impacts on the organizations? What does actually socio-economic changes? It changes people's mindset. Now, if people's mindset is changed and if you don't change it, obligations, rules and regulations, the two don't match. Globalization of business. Well, let's go back to the 1990s. We have not heard any multinational brand. Whenever we used to go to a shop to buy a biscuit, there used to be only one type of a biscuit in khaki cover. Whatever, the parley or whatever it was. And the whole package used to look so dull to us. But today when you enter any store, every package, works like a silent salesman. It attracts you to that. And most of them are multinational brands. Now, if you have multinational brands in your organization, and if you as a national brand wants to compete, there's no way other than to adopt those practices. Relook at the way a domestic company does and the way a multinational company does, because unless you attract a good talent, you will not be able to compete with this multinational company. See, it is given that today you can have access to technology, today you can have access to finance, or what you name it. But the only important point here is you cannot have access to the people, the talented people. If you have an access, you may not be able to retain them with you. If you are able to retain with you, you may not be able to get an output, desired output from them. So it's a very difficult proposition in changing environment. Regulatory environment, the law. And most important that is the labor laws. We have a plethora of labor laws. Our Prime Minister Modi recently said there are about 40 national laws and around 150 state laws which has to be scrapped related to labor only. I'm talking about related to labor only. Now, you have a law that you cannot close your company if you have more than 100 employees in it without the government permission. Now, it takes years and years to get that government permission. And you have to at least send up about 40 types of returns every month. Thankfully, the government has now changed that you can close any installation which has less than 300 employees, and you can send your returns on Shram Suvidha portal, so that you don't have to go to the labor, you don't have to have a labor inspector coming to your own organization, which is quite troublesome for people. So these are some of the changes which are coming, but unfortunately, what if the government wishes does not happen? Because you must have seen a couple of weeks back, our trade unions across the country were up in arms. They went on a day's strike because they were opposing all those changes which the government was. So in my mind, it is a tough call. Unless otherwise, the workers and trade unions are convinced of the changes, it will be very difficult. And my only advice as an individual is that all the three concerned individuals like trade unions, employers and government has to come on the negotiating table if we really want to change the regulatory environment and make this industry friendly, so that you have a large number of multinational companies coming to India and investing and making India as successful. Next important challenge which I look at is workforce mobility. Today a worker does not mind moving any corner of the country, forget about country, any corner of the globe. I remember old times when certain people were transferred to Chennai, they almost started crying. What would we eat? How would we eat? How would we reach there? But recent times, I've seen in Chennai a huge number of people from north working there, and they all adapted themselves to their eating habits and the way they work, the way they celebrate their festivals. So it's a far more integration than what it used to be in the past. So what it accounts is that the mobility of the worker is not restricted today. So therefore, a worker is always free to move from one country to another country. That means there would be chances of higher attrition rate, unless otherwise